Alright then, so I think the last few days have been pretty darn positive on the channel, so it's about time that we change that and bring on a negative video, because I know you guys absolutely love them. Okay, so, the alt problem. This is something I've noticed while I've been leveling up, and I have not talked about it yet, so I think now is probably a decent time to get started. So, I'm going to be talking about leveling in Warlords of Draenor from a different perspective. My top 10 video focused a lot on how good the singular 90 to 100 experience is, and I do stand by everything in that video, because in that video I was just saying, listen, here we go, I leveled from 90 to 100, I had a bloody good time, there was a great story, you know, the zones were pretty well done, but that was one run through, and I think that video is still completely accurate in the context of its whole point, which was just saying, hey, they made awesome zones, but there is one little issue, and that is alts. Now, I know that there is no expansion, no set of zones that is going to be impervious to, well, boredom after a few times through, but I think that Warlords of Draenor is going to be particularly susceptible to the problem. So you see, the thing about Warlords of Draenor leveling is that in terms of zone progression, it is very linear. You start in Tanaan, you go to Shadowmoon Valley / Frostfire Ridge, whether you are in the Alliance or the Horde, then you go to Gorgrond, then you go to Talador, then the Spires of Iraq, and finally, you finish things off in Nagrand. It's going to be like that every time. That is how this works, unfortunately. Now, there is a little bit of a silver lining here, and that is that within each zone there is a decent amount of choice, with there being bonus objectives and side quest chains and things like that. But that won't really be enough after your first or second character, and actually, they have recently increased the amount of XP that you need to level by 30%. Now, granted, the old sort of beta leveling was extremely quick, but the old beta leveling at least would allow you to go through a zone doing maybe 1 or 2 side quests and all of the main story quests and then get a ding, so that perhaps if you were going on an alt character you could just do all the side quests and a few bonus objectives and maybe you wouldn't have to repeat the story quest again. That's no longer going to be the case. You will probably have to do the majority of every zone to level up, and I suppose that does make a decent degree of sense when you think about it. But again, it's not particularly alt-friendly. Certainly not. And I suppose one other bit of the silver lining is that as you go and level multiple times, well, you'll get to choose a different Garrison Outpost perk, so that will give you a little bit more flair to every zone. But I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison for you. Let's jump back in time. Back in time to Northrend, to World of Warcraft's most successful expansion, and I say most successful based off the number of people who were actively playing the game during said expansion. Maybe there was more growth in TBC, but whatever. Northrend was the biggest in terms of the numbers, and honestly, it was my favourite expansion. I said it then, I said it during Cataclysm, I said it during Mists, and I'm still saying it during the MOP beta, or the WoD beta. You know, no matter how many times people will accuse me of being just ultra nostalgic about it. Trust me, it's not. I've even leveled through it recently. But one of the things about Northrend was that it was a continent that was full of choice. You could start off at one of the 2 starter zones, being the, you know, the Borean Tundra and the Howling Fjord, and after you would finish either one of those, you would get to level 72. You could do that twice, you know, on 2 separate characters, and you would not experience any repeated content by the time you get to level 72. Now after that, you could go to Dragonblight, and Dragonblight was so massive that it was basically 2 different zones. I mean, hell, you had basically different storylines going on in the east and the west, so you could do the entire of Dragonblight and get to level 75, or you could just do a little bit of Dragonblight, maybe get to level 74 or 73. And from there, you could go to Zuldrak, the Grizzly Hills, or Sholazar Basin. There's even more choice, and then finally, you have the choice between the Storm Peaks and Icecrown Citadel. There was so much choice there, and another little thing as well is that you could just hop from zone to zone, do what you wanted, and, you know, not be sort of limited to just being bogged down in a single zone for ages. There was so much freedom, and there was so much choice. It really did work out quite well from my own personal perspective, you know? And okay, maybe if each of those zones had, you know, maybe a questing that was perhaps more in the quality of some of the Warlords of Draenor stuff, it would be better, but you know what? It did have its bright spots, you know? It had some of the cooler quests in the Howling Fjord, some of the really badass stuff that went on in Dragonblight with Bolvar, and of course you had the really amazing intro to Icecrown Citadel. There was a lot of great lore going on in the Storm Peaks, but perhaps one or two of the refinements that you do see in Warlords would have been nice, and perhaps the bonus objectives could have been nice. But still, while the zones themselves maybe were not always perfect, there was a lot of choice between them, and I think that this was a great model for doing things in World of Warcraft, because what we have to remember is that in World of Warcraft, you are an adventurer. You should be adventuring. And while in Warlords of Draenor, that adventuring thing does sort of hold up and be the case for your first run through, you're not going to get in subsequent runs. Guess what? Back in Northrend, you could maybe do that continent 3 times and experience a decent amount of new content on every single run. Perhaps even 4 times if you were using heirloom items. I think that, the basic visual difference that you get from having a lot of choice between your zones is something that's really important, and just fundamentally, in Warlords of Draenor, you're just going to get, I think, pretty bored by your second time through. I know that my maybe 5th time through the Tanan jungle made me want to just close my computer down because, damn, I'd done that 45-minute experience, which once is awesome, really cool, but I'll tell you, on the 5th time, it'll drive you up the bloody walls. Yeah, so, again, this content is great in your first time through, but it suffers harder than it needs to across multiple choices because of the lack of freedom between zones. And that's just a little bit of a problem, and I suppose it's just a fundamental difference. Wrath of the Lich King gave us more zones that were each quite lengthy, and, there was a choice to progress through whatever we wanted. Whereas Warlords of Draenor gives us less zones that we go through faster, but does not give us the choice. So I suppose, at the very least, while your 5th time through Draenor may feel extremely boring, at least it's going to be a decently fast one. I suppose that is definitely a bit of a plus point to it all. I don't know whether this is a net good or bad thing. All I'm going to say is that I did prefer the way Northrend has done things. I liked having that choice, I liked having the freedom, and I think it did make for a more just expansive world, because you could hit level 100 and still think, oh, Shadowstar Basin, what's going on there? There's still a little bit more just mysticism to the whole thing, whereas in Warlords it just kind of makes the entire continent of Draenor a known quantity on your first run through, and perhaps there's just not as much longevity there. Anyway, that's basically it. What I want to know is, well, honestly, you probably can't really speak from a position of authority if you haven't been in the beta test, so really this question goes out to the beta testers. To those of you who have leveled from 90 through 100 multiple times, what do you think? That's what I want to know. Do you think that it's going to get really painful when we get onto live? Personally, I think it might, and if you're not on the Warlords of Draenor beta, well, let me know what you just think about leveling in World of Warcraft in general. What do you think was your favorite expansion in terms of leveling, and especially, I want to know that if you are someone who is involved in, multiple alts and things like that. Anyway, that's it for this quick little video. Sorry for a bit of a downer, but I think it is certainly a point that needed to be made. Anyway, with all that said, I will see you next time.